Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to explore the architecture of trust, literally taking a journey from the classic pages of Les Misérables all the way to modern philosophy. We're starting off with this really beautiful, highly optimistic quote from the 19th century author Victor Hugo. "He who opens a school door closes a prison." You know, back then, the logic probably seemed totally airtight, right? Just cure ignorance and poverty with some good old-fashioned education, and poof, crime will naturally just vanish. It was genuinely seen as the ultimate magic bullet for societal ills.
But we really have to ask ourselves, in the 21st century, is this actually true? Does education alone guarantee a crime-free society? Because, let's be real, if we look around our modern world, we see incredibly high literacy rates sitting right alongside absolutely staggering rates of repeat offenses. So, if education isn't the sole key to dismantling the cycle of crime, well, what is?
To figure this out, we actually need to look at Hugo's masterpiece, Les Misérables. Here's the setup. A hardened ex-convict, Jean Valjean, steals some incredibly valuable silver from the humble bishop who took him in for the night. And when the police inevitably catch him and drag Valjean back, the bishop does the unthinkable. He doesn't condemn the guy. Instead, he hands Valjean 2 extra silver candlesticks and claims he simply forgot them. He completely forgives him. And this single, radical act of trust, it completely rewires Valjean's entire life.
But here's the wild part. This wasn't just fiction. Hugo actually based the bishop on a real historical figure, Monseigneur Bienvenu de Myriel. Born into aristocracy, he literally lost everything he had during the French Revolution. Yet, rather than making him bitter, that profound loss forged this radical empathy in him. When he later became the Bishop of Digne, he actively went out of his way to visit prisons, showing deep compassion to criminals at a time when society demanded nothing but harsh, brutal punishment.
So, how on earth does this work in the real world? Well, let's look at a fascinating paper from Chapman University researcher Michael Pace. He actually uses this exact story from Les Misérables to ask a really tough question. How can we rationally trust someone when literally all the evidence tells us they are completely untrustworthy? To answer that, Pace introduces a concept called therapeutic trust. Basically, this means trusting someone with the explicit aim of inspiring them to become more trust-responsive. And this is exactly what the bishop did. I mean, he didn't have a shred of evidence that Valjean was a good person, but he trusted him anyway, using that trust as a therapeutic tool to fundamentally inspire him to change.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the vital distinction Pace makes between merely entrusting someone and genuinely trusting them. Think of it like this. You can entrust your house keys to a teenager while fully expecting to come home to a chaotic, raging house party, right? In that case, you're just handing over responsibility to maybe catch them in the act or teach them a lesson. But genuine trust? That requires expecting them to act for the right reasons. It's hoping that your faith in them actually weighs heavily on their conscience.
So why does this actually work? Well, philosophers suggest it acts as a ridiculously powerful source of encouragement. When you genuinely trust someone, you're conveying deep respect and esteem. And for an outcast, being treated with that level of respect, it's a total shock to the system. In a very real way, therapeutic trust can act as a self-fulfilling prophecy. By treating someone as their best possible self, you are providing the psychological scaffolding they need to actually reach that height. It's a mechanism we can all apply, honestly, whether that's in our families or our workplaces.
Pace also brings up this amazing concept called the second line of trust. Now, the first line is pretty standard. You trust someone to do a specific action right now. But what if they fail? Well, the second line means trusting someone to one day become the sort of person who is trustworthy. Think about Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolent resistance. He placed his followers directly in harm's way, fully expecting the authorities to be brutal in that immediate moment. But he possessed a second line of trust, this deep faith that showing the authorities their own brutality would eventually awaken their conscience and inspire them to become just.
Ultimately, true trust requires extreme vulnerability. Pace calls this the confident enough to risk account of trust. Basically, to truly manifest therapeutic trust, you have to take a practical risk on someone, while fully acknowledging the severe cost if they fail. It's a highly calculated leap of faith. The therapeutic thought here is that your willingness to take this massive, risky leap is exactly the jolt that will shock the person into changing their behavior.
And this brilliantly illustrates why this philosophy is so urgently needed today. Let's pivot for a second to modern data from the NHIA Foundation analyzing if education actually cures crime. The numbers reveal a really stark contrast. Japan has a 99% literacy rate and a very low crime index. But look at Venezuela. With a nearly identical 95% literacy rate, it has a skyrocketing crime index of over 82. So Victor Hugo's 19th century optimism? It was a bit flawed. Basic education alone simply cannot override human motivations or systemic poverty.
Honestly, the true failure of our modern penal system is best captured by one specific academic metric, recidivism. That's simply defined as the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend. We operate on this core assumption that harsh punishment teaches a lesson, right? But criminology tells a very, very different story. Think about it. If prison were truly rehabilitative, recidivism would barely even exist.
Let's move to and see how this builds when we break down the statistical reality, which is just staggering. Within the UK justice system, a jarring 78% of former inmates are convicted of another crime within 9 years of their release. Almost 8 out of 10 people end up right back where they started. The stigma, the lack of jobs, and the incredibly brutalizing environment all but ensure their survival instincts just drive them right back to crime. It completely exposes the failure of traditional incarceration. And unfortunately, this pattern holds up globally. In the US, 45% of released prisoners are back in jail within just 5 years, and 10% are back within 6 months. It's a glaringly obvious revolving door. It proves that pure punishment without rehabilitation, and crucially without trust, simply does not work.
So bringing all these sources together, we are left looking at two very different architectures for dealing with human failure. On one side, we have the staggering, statistically proven failure of harsh justice and purely punishment-based systems. And on the flip side, we have the transformative, albeit highly risky, power of therapeutic trust. It requires stepping completely outside of the cold, hard evidence. It requires seeing someone not for the crimes they have committed, but for the person they have the potential to become if given genuine, authentic respect.
We know what doesn't work. We know for a fact that locking people away and withholding trust just creates an endless cycle of reoffending. The philosophy of Bishop Myriel and the mechanics of therapeutic trust offer a radical alternative, but it requires immense courage. As we look at the failures of our modern justice system, so the crucial point is, are we confident enough to risk trusting the untrustworthy?